Granite Bay was a city that held its breath, a fictional jewel on the East Coast. The night was dry and cold, the harbor water a sheet of black glass reflecting the aggressive neon of the downtown strip. Inside the Heliotrope Hotel, a skyscraper of sheer glass and ambition. The city's elite were pretending to care. The charity gala was in full swing, champagne flowing like water, the sound of polite laughter echoing off the marble floors. Then, Aurelio Voss arrived. He did not just enter a room, he altered its gravity, known in whispers as Don Voss. He was the billionaire financier, cleaning up the docks, the underworld tycoon who had dragged the port into the 21st century with steel-reinforced contracts and an iron will. He moved with a stillness that was colder than the night air. His suit was a shadow, his presence a blade. Partners bowed, enemies flinched. Voss commanded respect not because he was loud, but because he was the foundation upon which half the city stood. And he could just as easily be the earthquake that brought it down. Mara Lennox stood near the main entrance, invisible in her efficiency. She was the contract security manager for the event, a single mother doing a job. Her gaze swept the room, sharp and practiced, cataloging exits, threats, and the overprivileged. Nearby, ostensibly waiting for the event to finish so her mom could drive her home, sat her daughter, Nova Lennox, 15 years old, headphones on, looking bored. Mara always kept Nova close on these late gigs. It was just easier than arranging pickup. Mara's past was a carefully curated void, full of resume gaps and quiet relocations. She looked like any other working mother, slightly tired, thoroughly professional. The 6 men arrived late. They did not stride. They flowed, moving through the opulent lobby in dark, tailored suits that fit just a little too well. They looked like guests, but their hands told a different story. Below the cuffs of their expensive shirts, the skin over their wrists was thick with calluses, the kind of scarring left by handling blades, not briefcases. Each man carried a pair of folding knives, hidden, weighted, thin as paper and just as sharp, 12 blades in total. Mara's earpiece hissed, static, loud and abrasive, then silence. A 3-second blast of white noise. Someone was jamming the frequency. It was a tactical assault. Her blood went cold. Instinct, honed by a life she never spoke of, took over. She keyed her private mic, switching to a hardline backup channel. Lock the terrace doors. All units, converge on the central axis, now. Nova, seeing her mother tense, lifted her smartphone. She angled it toward the new arrivals, pretending to capture the chandeliers for social media. But the phone was not in camera mode. It was running a diagnostic Mara had installed years ago. A target tagging overlay painted the screen, invisible to anyone but the user. Nova's eyes were unnervingly calm. She did not just see 6 men. She measured the shallow rhythm of their breathing, the minute shifts in their balance. Don Voss saw the 7th man first, not in the crowd, but above it. A flicker of movement on the glass mezzanine railing, a shadow detaching itself, pulling a thin wire garrote. Voss opened his mouth to warn his personal guard, but he was too late. Nova was already moving. She did not shout. She did not panic. She dropped her center of gravity, lunging forward, her hands shooting up. She snatched the heavy decorative rope from a velvet stanchion in one fluid motion. She looped it, crossed her arms, and snapped the rope taut around the throat of the man dropping from the rafters. It was not a choke. It was a pivot. She used his own momentum against him, slamming him into the marble floor. A black taser skittered from his paralyzed hand. The gala exploded. The illusion of civility vanished in a symphony of screams. The 6 men on the floor moved simultaneously. 12 blades flashed under the crystal lights. "Nova!" Mara roared, pulling her daughter backward, shoving her behind the towering LED screen that served as the stage backdrop. Mara did not hesitate. She ripped the pin from the nearest fire extinguisher and blasted a dense cloud of white chemical mist into the main hall. Voss barked an order to his men, a signal to deploy their own smoke screen, a contingency for just such an event. But the fog was already swirling, and Nova Lennox was the first one through it. It lasted 28 seconds, through the haze. Voss watched the girl, the child. She moved like a ghost, silent, economical. She did not punch, she struck. A palm heel to a jaw, displacing the joint. A precise strike to the side of a knee, breaking the man's balance. A quick chop to a pressure point in the neck. 3 of the 6 men collapsed without a sound, their bodies folding instantly, their balance points utterly compromised. Voss, a man who had seen brutality his entire life, watched in stunned silence. This was not a brawl. This was programming. Far in the distance, sirens wailed. They were too close, too fast. Mara recognized the distinct rhythm of the Federal Integrity Bureau. The sound chilled her more than the blades. She grabbed Nova's arm, her mind racing. This was not just an assassination attempt. The sender, whoever they were, had factored in the response. They wanted Voss caught, holding the bag, surrounded by unconscious assassins. It was a frame. The chaos of the ballroom floor settled into the cold, blue strobing of law enforcement. Mara Lennox watched the FIB agents' Federal Integrity Bureau swarm the scene. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not from fear, but from a cold, familiar rage. Her focus was laser-sharp on Nova, who sat quietly on a silk-covered banquet chair, insulated from the main questioning. Mara had spent a decade trying to blunt her daughter's edges, to bury the instincts she herself had been cursed with. She had taught Nova body awakening. That was the sanitized term the program used. Gray Line, a non-governmental project that sounded like humanitarian aid but specialized in turning good people, desperate people, into instruments. Mara had fled that life precisely so Nova would never have to be sharp, would never have to calculate the vectors of an attack. She just wanted her daughter to be normal. Tonight, that normalization felt like a catastrophic failure. Aurelio Voss stood apart, flanked by his 2 remaining personal guards. He ignored the agents attempting to get his statement. He was analyzing the attack, replaying the 28 seconds of Nova's intervention. The men who had survived her, the 3 she had clinically disabled, were now cuffed, silent and sneering. Voss knew this kind of work. He had spent 5 years and a significant portion of his fortune eradicating the Rust Choir gang to build his clean port. This was different. This new enemy, the 12-fold veil, was surgical. They favored knives. Knives were quiet. Knives left no ballistic trail for forensics. Knives were an intimate, terrifying message. The main elevator doors chimed, and the noise level in the lobby dropped. Special Agent Petra Soames stepped out, her trench coat immaculate, her expression one of professional boredom. "Dawn Voss," she said, her voice carrying too easily over the din. "Causing trouble at charity events now." She had arrived too quickly. Her team had secured the perimeter within 4 minutes of the first signal. Voss knew the standard FIB response time for a Priority 1 alert in this district. It was 12 minutes, on a good night. Soames was either psychic or she had been parked around the corner. Voss smelled the setup, pungent and sour. Soames turned her sharp gaze to the teenager. And this must be the prodigy. Nova was methodically wrapping a linen napkin around her knuckles, which were already coloring with deep bruises. "You took down 3 trained men. Kid, how did you manage that?" Soames asked, her tone deceptively light. Nova looked up, her face pale but her eyes utterly steady. "He fell. I pushed him. They slipped on the ice from the extinguisher." She spoke in simple, declarative sentences. She offered nothing. She was a perfect gray wall, revealing none of the training Mara had drilled into her. "They slipped," Soames repeated, a thin, disbelieving smile touching her lips. "Right." The procedural dragnet lasted for another hour. Finally, Voss was cleared to leave. He approached Mara and Nova, who were standing near the coat check, waiting to be dismissed. "You are not safe," Voss stated. It was not an opinion, it was a fact. "My car is downstairs. I will see you home." Mara stiffened, crossing her arms. She looked at this man, a figure who represented the exact world of power and violence she had tried to escape. "We are fine, Mr. Voss. We do not need an escort." She refused to be indebted to him, to be pulled into his orbit, but Nova looked at him. She saw the profound exhaustion behind the steel, the deep-seated isolation of a man who commanded everyone but connected with no one. It was a loneliness she recognized instantly. It was the same look her mother wore late at night when she thought Nova was asleep. They were released, and Mara ushered Nova outside into the cold air to find a cab. As they waited on the curb, Mara's phone buzzed with a text from a blocked number. 12 blades are just a greeting. Symbol a 12. Mara's blood went cold. The sigma. 12. Mom. Nova's voice was quiet, pulling her from the digital threat. She held something small and black in her palm. I found this in the shattered chandelier above where we were standing. It was a pinhole camera, high resolution and still warm. Mara took it, turning it over. The firmware logo etched into the casing was not a commercial brand. It was an acronym OMO, Office of Maritime Oversight, a quasi-governmental agency that supposedly monitored harbor regulations. Mara's mind connected the dots with sickening speed, the frequency jamming, the impossibly fast FIB response, the surveillance camera from a port authority. The attacker was not outside the system. They were the system. They were wearing fake, legitimate badges. Going to the city police, or even back to the FIB, would be walking straight into a trap. They would become bait. A black town car, sleek and silent as a shark, glided to the curb. The rear window lowered, revealing Voss. He had been waiting, watching. His gaze fell on the pinhole camera in Mara's hand, then lifted to the terror blooming in her eyes. He understood immediately that she had just caught up. He extended a simple, heavy-stock business card. It held only a name and a number. When you are ready to pick a side, call me. His gaze shifted to Nova, lingering for a beat longer than necessary. It was not the curious look of a man assessing a threat, nor the predatory look of a man assessing a tool. It was respect. He nodded. Once. To the girl. The window slid up, and the car disappeared into the Granite Bay traffic. They took a cab back to their small apartment complex, the silence between mother and daughter thick with unspoken fears. The cab pulled away, leaving them on the dark, quiet street. Mara saw them first, scattered across their welcome mat, thrown onto the small patch of grass that passed for a yard. Photographs? They were surveillance photos. Nova at the bus stop, Mara at the grocery store, Nova sleeping, the image captured through her own bedroom window. Mara ran to the front door, her hands shaking as she fumbling for her keys. She stopped. Painted on the glass of their front window, still dripping in the cold night air, was a single, greasy symbol drawn in heavy black oil. They did not return to the apartment. They did not even go near it. Mara drove their aging sedan for 2 hours, using every counter-surveillance trick she had ever learned, until she was satisfied they were clean. She pulled into the Spindrift Motel, a place of peeling paint and buzzing neon on the suburban fringe, paying in cash under a name she had not used in 5 years. The room smelled of bleach and regret. The first thing Mara did was jam the flimsy desk chair under the doorknob. It was a useless gesture against a professional, but it was a ritual. From her bag, she retrieved a spool of fishing line and 2 empty soda cans. She balanced the cans on the inside windowsill, the line strung taut between them, low to the ground, a primitive tripwire. It was a technique from the Gray Line Field Manual for use in denied environments. It was the habit of a woman who had spent half her life expecting the door to burst open. Nova watched this process in silence, her arms wrapped around herself on the stiff polyester bedspread. "That will not stop them. Mom," she said finally. Her voice was flat. "It is not meant to stop them," Mara replied, testing the tension of the line. "It is meant to wake me. You taught me to run," Nova said, her voice quiet but piercing the stale air. "Observe and exit, threat identification and evasion, for 5 years. So why did I run in tonight? Why did I fight?" Mara froze. She turned slowly to face her daughter. The question hung between them, more dangerous than any blade. "I do not know, Nova." "You tell me." "Because they were going to kill him," Nova said, her eyes finding her mother's. "And you also taught me that we are supposed to be the good guys. I wrote my own rule. Mom, you save people before they are forced to become killers." A spike of fear, colder and sharper than the night air, shot through Mara. "Do not say that." Her voice was a harsh whisper. "Do not ever think you are like them. I taught you how to survive, not how to engage. You are not me. And what are you, Mom?" Nova's eyes flashed, not with tears, but with a sudden, adult anger. "I'm afraid of you becoming that again, like 3 years ago, when you disappeared for 6 months and came back. Different, when you lost half a year of memories and could not look at me for a week." The accusation landed like a physical blow. It was the great, unspoken chasm between them, the 6-month gap. The mission that had gone so wrong, Greyline had been forced to scrub Mara's memory, leaving only scar tissue, phantom pains, and a daughter who had learned to parent herself. Nova was not afraid of the men in suits. She was terrified of the empty-eyed woman her mother had been forced to become. And she had seen a flash of that woman in herself tonight. The argument was cut short by the violent vibration of Mara's phone on the nightstand. The screen showed an unknown number. She let it ring twice, then answered. Putting it on speaker, "I assume you are not at home?" Aurelio Voss's voice filled the room, calm and devoid of preamble. "Good. A refrigerated truck just arrived at your apartment building. It bears the Sigma symbol. They are not subtle." Mara's breath caught. They had waited. They knew she would have to come home. "How did you—" "I have people. They are watching. My offer stands. Mara, my estate on the South Shore. It is an island, connected by a single causeway. It is secure." He paused, a calculated beat. "Oh, yes, and there is a safe room." Mara looked at Nova. She was trapped between the organized, predictable violence of a man like Voss and the chaotic, insidious violence of the 12-fold veil. "I cannot be your prisoner. Voss." Nova reached out and took the phone from her mother's hand. "We will come," Nova said, her voice shocking in its firmness. She looked directly at her mother. "I trust him. Mom, but you keep the key." Mara stared at her daughter, seeing not a child, but a partner. She took the phone back, her mind made up. "We are on our way. One condition, I get full administrative control of all defense lockdowns. No back doors, no overrides I do not personally hold." There was a moment of silence on the line. Then, Voss's voice, tinged with what might have been amusement. "Agreed. I will also give your daughter access to the Canary grid. She seems to enjoy watching." The South Shore estate was less a house and more a concrete and glass fortress, beautiful and severe, overlooking the dark, churning Atlantic. True to his word, Voss met them at the door. He handed Mara a heavy, encrypted tablet and left them in the guest wing. Mara spent the first hour verifying the protocols: steel shutters, internal gates, CO2 scrubbers, independent power, no back doors. She controlled the cage. Nova, meanwhile, sat at a dedicated terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard, accessing the Canary grid. It was the most sophisticated AI-driven camera network she had ever seen, covering every inch of the estate with overlapping fields of vision. That night, the alarm was silent. It was Nova who spoke, her voice tight, not moving from the screen. "Mom, we have company. Fence line, south quadrant, 6 new targets." Mara was at her side in an instant. The monitor showed 6 men, different from the gala team, dressed in dark utility gear. They were not carrying blades. They were moving along the perimeter fence in the shadows, pausing every few feet to tie something small and white to the wire. Nova zoomed the camera, the lens adjusting with a near silent whir. "They are paper flowers," she whispered, her blood running cold. Mara understood immediately. Contact poison. A weapon that did not need to breach the walls, a weapon that waited for the wind or for the touch of a single unsuspecting hand. "I have to get a sample," Nova said. She opened her backpack and pulled out a mini drone, no bigger than her hand. "Nova, no, absolutely not. They are still outside the hard perimeter. Mom, the wind is blowing inland. I can catch the particle traces before they disperse." Before Mara could argue, the drone was out the window, a silent mosquito in the dark. Nova navigated it skillfully, hovering just above one of the delicate paper flowers, its micro-vacuum sampling the air. She brought it back, swabbed the filter, and placed it in a small, portable analysis kit. The results materialized in seconds: a complex neurotoxin, suspended in a distinct, oil-based pheromone. "It's traceable," Nova murmured, her mind racing. She uploaded the chemical signature to the drone, launching it again. "It can follow the scent trail back to the source." They watched the drone's path on the map, a glowing red line moving away from the estate, back over the causeway, heading toward the industrial wharves. It finally stopped, hovering over a single, nondescript warehouse on Pier 4. Nova zoomed the drone's camera, punching through the darkness. The logo painted on the side of the building was stark white: OMO. Aurelio Voss appeared in the doorway, drawn by their activity. He looked at the screen, at the OMO logo, and his face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "This," he said, "complicates things." "You know them," Mara stated. It was not a question. Voss nodded, his expression grim. "The Office of Maritime Oversight is notoriously slow, corrupt. I wanted the Green Port project fast-tracked." He looked at Mara, his eyes holding no apology, only the weight of fact. "I made payments to certain inspectors to make them look the other way, so the real work could get done." He motioned to the screen. "I paid them to speed things up. Now it seems someone else is paying them to use their dirtier skills against me." Mara finally saw the whole, ugly picture: the assassins at the gala, the setup by Agent Soames, the OMO surveillance camera, the poison. "It is not just one group," she said, thinking aloud. "It is an alliance, the 12-fold Veil, a rogue faction inside OMO, and Soames's corrupt branch of the FIB. They are all working together." Nova did not sleep. She sat at the terminal, the glow of the canary grid monitors painting her face in shades of blue and white. The mini-drone had not just brought back a chemical signature. It had established a weak, temporary data link with the OMO warehouse's unsecured network as it hovered. Nova was not an aggressive hacker, she was a listener. She passively mirrored the data packets, letting the warehouse's own systems talk to her. She found it buried in a maintenance subfolder, an internal memo, flagged as urgent. A surprise spot inspection was scheduled for the following night, the location Pier 12. "Mom, Voss," she called out, her voice low. The two adults entered the command center, mugs of coffee in hand. Nova pointed to the screen. "Pier 12. It matches the Sigma symbol, equals 12. Voss leaned in, his eyes hard. "A setup. It's more than that," Nova said. She pulled up the port's public schematic, then overlaid it with the OMO's internal camera feed map she had just downloaded. "Look." She zoomed in on Pier 12. The public map shows full camera coverage. The OMO map, not quite. She highlighted two camera feeds. "This one is angled 7 degrees too far to the left. This one 7 degrees to the right. It is deliberate." Mara traced the resulting gap on the screen. It created a narrow, 30-meter patch of darkness, a perfect unmonitored channel from the street to the loading bay. "A blade corridor," she whispered. "A place for men with knives to walk without being seen." "Then we hit them there," Voss said, his voice a low growl. He reached for his phone. "I will move my entire force. We will turn that pier into a slaughterhouse." "No!" Mara's voice cut through his anger, sharp and absolute. He turned, surprised by her authority. "They want you at Pier 12, Mara explained, her mind working with cold precision. "They are dangling it in front of us. It is a trap. Aurelio. A loud, obvious trap designed to draw your strength. They need you and all your men occupied at the port so they can strike somewhere else." Voss lowered his phone, his gaze analytic. Wherever they think you are most vulnerable," and Mara said, "So, we will tell them." The plan was simple. An hour later, a known informant on Voss's payroll, one he knew was a double agent, was given a priceless tip. Don Voss was liquidating a sensitive asset in a private, high-stakes game. The location was the Sky Arcade, a glass-walled club on the top floor of a downtown skyscraper. It was the perfect lure for the 12-fold Veil, a target, isolated, high above the city. Later that afternoon, Mara found Nova in the estate's empty gymnasium. The girl was moving through a routine, her feet silent on the mats. It was not a drill Mara had taught her. It was a fluid, lethal sequence, 5 short, percussive strikes, followed by 9 rapid shifts in angle to defend and counter, all executed in the space of a single, controlled breath. 5 beats, 9 angles, 1 breath. Mara felt a cold sickness rise in her throat. She had never shown Nova that sequence. It was a gray line protocol, reserved for senior operatives, a technique for eliminating multiple, armed opponents in confined spaces. Nova had not just learned the basics, she had extrapolated, or worse. She was remembering things Mara had never intended to pass on. Her daughter, her brilliant, quiet daughter, was a natural-born weapon. Mara watched, her hands shaking, terrified of the perfect, deadly thing she had created. That evening, the 3 of them sat at the massive oak table in Voss's dining room. The tension of the coming night was a 4th guest at the table. They ate in silence for a long time. "My brother, Leo," Voss said suddenly, his voice quiet. He stared at the dark wine in his glass. He was not like me. He was soft. He worked on the old docks, the ones the Rust Choir ran. They forced him to move a package. He did not know what was in it. It was a bomb, meant for a rival. It detonated early. He looked up, his eyes bleak. "That is why I bought the port. That is why I am cleaning it. I am not a good man, Mara. But I am building something clean on top of the filth that killed him. I want to break the cycle." Mara met his gaze. The admission cost him, and she respected it. She owed him the same. "When I was with Greyline," she began, her voice low, "there was a mission, a rescue, in a failed state. I pulled a little girl, maybe 6 years old, out of a collapsed building. Her whole family was gone. I got her to the extraction point." Mara's hand tightened around her fork. "After I was debriefed, I asked where the girl was, which agency was handling her relocation. My handler told me the file was sealed. He told me to forget her face. He said, 'She is an asset now, not a person.' That is when I knew I had to leave. I hate these nameless agencies. I hate that they turn people into tools." They looked at each other, the space between them charged. They were not so different. He wanted to destroy the cycle of violence with clean infrastructure. She wanted to cut the chain of destiny that threatened to turn her daughter into a tool. A high-pitched ping from Mara's phone shattered the moment. She glanced at the screen. Another message from... It was not text this time. It was an audio file. She pressed play. The room filled with a deep, digitally altered male voice. It was slow, resonant, and cold as the grave. The daughter speaks first. The mother stays silent forever. Mara dropped the phone as if it were burning. Her face went white. She had been wrong. They were not just trying to kill Voss, the gala, the OMO camera. The poison, it was all surveillance. Not just on Voss, but on Nova. Pier 12 was a distraction, and the Sky Arcade was a test. The real target, the prize they were hunting, was her daughter. The girl's technique, as Soames had called it, was becoming a legend in the shadows, and they wanted it for themselves. Voss saw the realization in her eyes. He stood, walked around the table, and placed his hand on Nova's shoulder. He did not look at Mara. He looked directly at the girl. "No one," he said, his voice a low, cold promise, "touches you without going through me." The Sky Arcade was a box of light, 50 stories above the city, bleeding neon red and blue onto the clouds. The air hummed with piped-in music, but the atmosphere was anything but relaxed. Voss's team, a dozen of his most trusted men, had spent the afternoon rigging the service corridors. High-powered electromagnets, hidden behind decorative wall panels, were wired to a single switch, designed to turn the room into a dead zone for folding steel blades. Nova was in the club's high-tech audio-visual booth, surrounded by monitors. She looked small in the large leather chair, but her focus was absolute. Her heartbeat was a slow, steady drumbeat in her ears. On the main floor, Mara stood near the bar, nursing a club soda, her earpiece live. Her eyes kept straying to the monitor that showed the back of her daughter's head. The service elevator, the one reserved for staff and high rollers, chimed. "Targets acquired," Nova's voice came over Mara's private channel, as calm and clear as an air traffic controller. 6. Service elevator. They are not dressed for a party. Voss and his 2 personal guards moved, placing themselves between the elevator and the main room. The doors slid open. 6 men stepped out. They were not the same team from the gala. These men wore dark, amphibious-looking tactical gear, and their faces were hidden behind smoked glass diver masks. Masks. Mara relayed to Voss. No visual ID. Nova, hit the magnets. Deploying. Nova said. The lights in the sky arcade flickered once as the power diverted to the walls. The 6 men did not react. They did not reach for their jackets. Instead, they raised their arms, and with a soundless snap, 12 blades slid from forearm sheaths. The blades were not steel. They were a dull, milky white. Ceramic, Voss bit out, his blood running cold. The magnets are useless. Version 2.0, Nova observed instantly. They anticipated the defense. Mom, they are advancing. The fight was sudden and brutal. The attackers moved in silence, splitting into 3 pairs, their ceramic knives slicing the neon-drenched air. Voss was not a fluid fighter like Nova. He was a force of nature, a brawler refined by decades of survival. His rhythm was a heavy 3-1-2, leveraged the incoming strike, blocked the stabbing arm with his own reinforced forearm, and downed the opponent with a debilitating counterstrike. He was not invincible, but he was infuriatingly stubborn. He took a shallow cut along his ribs, but used the opening to slam his attacker's head into the bar, dropping him cold. The attackers were good, too good. They pressed him, their movements coordinated, forcing Voss and his guards into a tightening circle. The main bar, Nova's voice said, sharp and focused. The CO2 ports for the drink system. They are creating a negative pressure point just behind their line. It is a choke point. Do it, Mara yelled, already moving. In the booth. Nova's hand slammed down on a keyboard command. A deafening hiss erupted from behind the bar, a massive cloud of ice-cold carbon dioxide gas, meant for chilling glasses, blasted out at floor level. The fog was heavier than air, opaque, and it instantly displaced the oxygen in the attacker's immediate vicinity. The men in masks faltered, their movements suddenly clumsy. They choked, their lungs screaming for air they could not get. It was only half a second, but it was enough. Mara launched herself over the bar just as the fog began to clear. She had a heavy, steel-toothed ice scoop in her hand. She met the first attacker, her style the polar opposite of Voss's, where he was stone. She was water. She flowed around his blade, used the ice scoop to trap his wrist against the wall, and drove her knee into his solar plexus. She was at Voss's side in an instant. They had never fought together, but their bodies understood the language. He was the shield. She was the blade. He absorbed the impact of a charging attacker, and Mara used the man's own momentum to hyperextend his elbow. He blocked a high strike, and she swept the man's leg. They moved in perfect, brutal harmony, a natural, unrehearsed partnership. It was over in seconds. 5 men were down, groaning, disarmed, and disabled. The 6th was pinned against the glass wall by Voss, his forearm crushing the man's throat. Mara ripped the diver's mask off. The man was pale, his eyes wide with terror. "Who sent you?" Voss demanded, his voice a low growl. "Go to hell." The man gasped. "Soames," Mara said, kneeling. "Agent Soames sent you. This was a cleanup, was not it?" The man's eyes flickered. He started to cough, a wet, rattling sound. Do not trust her," he wheezed, blood flecking his lips. "She's just a manager. The order, the money, and it comes from OMO. Codename Harbor King. He pays us all. He pays everyone." They left the attackers for Voss's cleanup crew and slipped into a dark, empty backstage dressing room. The door clicked shut, plunging them into silence, broken only by their harsh breathing. Adrenaline thrummed in the small space. "You are bleeding," Mara said, her voice rough. She pointed to Voss's upper arm, where his shirt was soaked dark. "It is nothing." "Sit," she commanded. He obeyed, sinking onto a heavy equipment case, hissing as he peeled the torn fabric away from a deep gash. Mara found a first aid kit on the wall. Her hands were shaking slightly, the post-combat reaction setting in. She tore open an antiseptic wipe and pressed it to the wound. He grunted, but his eyes never left her face. She was close, her brow furrowed in concentration. He could smell the faint, cold scent of the CO2 on her skin. The air in the room was thick, charged with the energy of the fight. But now, something else. Her hands stilled. He was watching her, not as a client, not as an ally, but as a man. His breathing was heavy, matching hers. He leaned in, just a fraction. She did not pull back. Her gaze dropped from his wound to his mouth. It was a moment suspended in time. Two survivors realizing they were still alive, still breathing the same air. The door squeaked open, flooding the room with light from the hallway. "Are you two done with medical?" They sprang apart, the moment shattering. Nova stood in the doorway, holding a bottle of water, her expression one of polite, neutral inquiry. A beat of stunned silence. Then Voss let out a short, rough laugh. The sound ripped from his chest. Mara turned away, hiding the smile that tugged at her lips. The terrifying, electric tension of the night dissolved, replaced by a sudden, ridiculous warmth. Later, back at the estate, the moon was high. Voss stood alone on the main balcony, the wind cold against his skin. He heard Mara approach, her footsteps light. "She is asleep," Mara said, coming to stand beside him, staring at the dark, churning ocean. "Or she is pretending, probably analyzing the security feeds from Pier 12. She is remarkable," Voss said quietly. "She is my daughter," Mara replied, her voice fierce. Then it softened. "When she is in that control room, and I know you are on the ground, I feel—" She stopped, unable to say the word. "What?" he asked. "Safe," Mara admitted. "I feel like she is safe when she is with you." Voss turned to face her, the moonlight catching the silver strands at her temples. He did not speak. He just reached out, his hand open, palm up, in the space between them. It was not a question of romance. It was a contract, deeper than any he had ever signed. It was a promise of mutual protection, an acknowledgement of the impossible, necessary triangle they had formed. Mara looked at his hand, scarred and strong. She placed her own on top of it. It was not a caress. It was an oath. "Tomorrow," Voss said, his fingers closing gently over hers. "We go into the heart of it, Pier 12. The rain began just after 3 a.m, a hard, driving Atlantic storm that lashed against the armored glass of the safe room. It was a sound of isolation, a reminder of the violent world held at bay by steel and concrete. Mara, unable to sleep, walked into the adjoining gymnasium that served as their command center. The main monitors glowed, displaying the perimeter, but the room was still. She found Aurelio Voss sitting not at the terminal, but on a weight bench, under a single pool of dim light. He was not giving orders, not checking his phone, not planning their next move. In his hands, he held a needle, a spool of heavy-gauge black thread, and one of Nova's small, tactical gloves. There was a tear in the reinforced knuckle. Mara watched him, unseen from the doorway. His hands, which she had seen crush a man's throat and sign billion-dollar contracts, were now impossibly patient. He executed each stitch with a precise, steady rhythm. He was mending her daughter's glove. The quiet domesticity of the act, set against the backdrop of their war, struck Mara with more force than any of the night's violence. "You're good at that," she said, her voice quiet, making him look up. He did not seem surprised to see her. He focused back on the stitch, pulling it taut. "My brother? Leo. He was always ripping his clothes. I was the older one. I learned to fix things so our mother would not worry." Mara walked closer, the moment feeling surreal. "Greyline is," she said, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. "The program I came from, they taught me to request numbness from myself, to see attachment, to see any feeling as a liability that could get you or your team killed." Voss finished the last stitch, bit the thread off with his teeth, and flexed the glove, testing the repair. It was perfect. "Then let me learn to feel, for both of us," he said, his voice a low rumble. He stood, turning to face her. "Let me learn to feel with you." He was close. The air between them, which had crackled with adrenaline at the Sky Arcade, was now thick with a different heavier charge. He did not move to grab her. He simply lifted one hand, the one that had just been sewing, and brushed his thumb over the faint line of exhaustion under her eye. It was a question, a test. She did not pull away. She leaned into the touch, a small, involuntary movement, closing her eyes. The kiss was not what she expected. It was not the desperate, frantic collision of two people clinging to life. It was slow, tentative. It was a test, a probe sent across the razor-thin line that separated them, searching to see if trust could still grow in such barren soil. His lips were firm, warm, and they held hers with a profound gentleness that belied the man he was. He deepened it, just slightly, and his other hand came up, not to her waist, but to the nape of her neck. It was a gesture of pure support, his fingers threading into her hair, holding her steady as if she might break. Their foreheads touched, the sound of the rain, the glow of the monitors. The entire world outside that small circle of warmth faded to nothing. His body language was a promise, clearer than any words. You are safe here. Her heavy jacket, still damp from the balcony, slid from her shoulders and pooled around their feet on the floor. The light was dim. The world stopped. There was only the sound of their breathing, unsteady, and the solid, unyielding strength of his arms as they finally circled her waist, pulling her flush against him. She could feel his heartbeat, strong and slow, and her own. A rapid, panicked bird against his chest. Then, slowly, impossibly, her rhythm began to match his. Mara, needing air, needing to see his face, pulled back just half a step. She kept her hand on his chest, her fingers spread wide. He covered her hand with his own, not moving it, just holding it there, pressing her palm flat against him. A small, genuine smile touched his lips, transforming his harsh features into something she had never seen before. It still chooses to live, and he murmured, feeling her pulse thrumming against his ribs. They did not speak for a long time. Later, they found themselves on the padded training mats on the floor, lying on their backs, side by side, staring up at the concrete ceiling. They did not touch. They just existed in the same quiet space. The storm raging outside. They whispered, not of the mission or of Harbor King, or of the men with blades. They whispered about quiet mornings, about the ridiculous price of coffee. Voss confessed he had never learned to poach an egg. Mara admitted she wanted to see Nova laugh without analyzing a threat first. It was an intimacy woven from shared truths, not shared bodies. It was more profound and more terrifying than any passion. They sat up, the spell breaking, the reality of their situation returning. "We need rules," Voss said, his voice back to its familiar, decisive tone. He grabbed a tablet. "Static rules, for the three of us." Mara nodded, her mind instantly sharp. "If one of us is in the field, the other is Nova's rear guard. No exceptions." "Agreed," he said, typing. "Nova is never to be used as bait. She is support, not a primary. And no lone heroes," Mara added, meeting his eyes. "All intel is shared, no secrets, not from each other." A shadow fell over them. They both looked up, tensing. Nova stood there, holding a thick, woolen blanket. Her expression was, as always, unreadable. She walked forward, and with a teenager's awkward, silent efficiency, she draped the blanket over both of their shoulders as they sat on the mat. She said nothing. She simply placed a folded piece of paper on the floor between them and walked back to the command terminal. Mara picked it up and unfolded it. The note was in Nova's precise, clean handwriting. "I approve, but do not hide things from me." A short, rough laugh escaped Voss. Mara felt a smile touch her own lips. A high-pitched chime cut through the quiet. It was not an intrusion alarm. It was a notification. They both turned to the main monitor. A decryption program Nova had been running on the OMO data had just completed its work. A single file, now unlocked, blinked on the screen, Project Harbor King, zip. The warmth of the last hour evaporated, replaced by ice. They stood up at the same time, the blanket falling unheeded to the floor. The new, fragile thing that had just taken root between them would have to wait. The storm was no longer outside. It was here. Nova's fingers flew across the keyboard, unzipping the file. The Harbor King project was not just a file. It was a conspiracy laid bare in spreadsheets and encrypted contracts. It detailed a hostile takeover of Granite Bay's shipping lanes, routed through a private, anonymous shell corporation, the final signature on the privatization deal for Pier 12. The one that granted the corporation oversight rights through the OMO belonged to an anonymous investor. Nova ran the digital signature through a cross-reference with FIB public asset declarations. A name popped up, Petra Soames. "Soames is Harbor King," Nova said, her voice flat. "She's not just a corrupt agent. She is the investor, using the FIB to secure her own criminal enterprise, with the OMO as her muscle." Voss stared at the screen, his face pale with a cold, controlled fury. "She had inside help. This data, the leak from my company. It had to come from someone with administrative access." He moved to his personal terminal, his movements lethargic, as if dreading what he would find. He ran a security audit of the access logs for the original port blueprints, cross-referencing them with Soames's digital footprint. There was one overlap, one user who had accessed the files from an unsecured network, just days before the Gala attack. "Calder," Voss whispered, the name a betrayal. Calder Ree, his deputy advisor. The man he had trusted with his financials for 8 years, a man he had considered a friend. Mara looked at the defeated slump in Voss's shoulders. "Do not break," she ordered, her voice sharp. "We use him." The plan was set in motion. Mara staged the entire encounter. Nova, dressed in a borrowed OMO intern uniform, complete with a fake ID, accidentally bumped into Calder Ree at a downtown coffee shop known for its OMO clientele. She panicked, dropping a stack of files. As she gathered them, she let him see the top sheet, a fake prospectus detailing a massive, untraceable payout for the second phase of the Harbor King project. Ree, his eyes gleaming with greed, helped her. "You seem stressed," he offered, his voice slick. It is my first week," Nova lied, pitching her voice with the perfect amount of youthful anxiety. "I'm just trying to understand the pay structure. The Sigma transfers are confusing." Ree laughed, leaning in conspiratorially. "A little tip, kid, do not get hung up on the Greek. It is not Sigma. It is sum, as in the sum total, 12-fold veil, 12 branches. OMO is one, Soames's unit is another. You find the other 10. You find the real money." He had given them everything, the structure, the motive. As Ree walked away, Mara's phone buzzed, a text from an unblocked number, bold and arrogant. It was from Soames. "Hand over Nova. This ends." Mara looked across the street where Nova was calmly dumping her coffee in a trash can. Her daughter, her asset, her child. She typed her reply, her thumb steady. "She's not merchandise." The response was almost instantaneous. "Then you have chosen Pier 12, midnight, or the bridge goes." "The bridge," Voss said, reading the message over her shoulder. "The zinc bridge. It is the only access point to the pier." "She is bluffing," Mara said, but her blood ran cold. "I cannot risk it," Nova said, her voice suddenly sharp. She was already at her laptop, pulling up the schematics for the zinc bridge. "It is a pressure-sensitive suspension bridge. It has electrical load sensors. If they planted explosives..." She ran a remote diagnostic, pinging the bridge's internal maintenance network. "Mom, there are fluctuations, the load sensors. They are reading micro-voltages that do not match the ambient weather pattern. They are not bluffing. They have put pressure mines on the bridge." "The shift change," Mara whispered, horrified. "The civilian port guards, they cross that bridge at midnight." "They are still alive," Nova said, her eyes fixed on the screen. 2 guards, they are on foot patrol, approaching the bridge now. They are 30 seconds out." "Call it in," Voss yelled. "No time," Nova shouted. She hacked into the bridge's emergency system, bypassing all protocols, and triggered the lockdown alarm, a deafening siren designed to clear the span in an emergency. On her monitor, she saw the 2 tiny figures representing the guards freeze, then turn and sprint away from the bridge. 5 seconds later, the first mine, likely triggered by their retreat. detonated, taking out the first 10 meters of the causeway in a flash of orange fire. Nova had saved them, with seconds to spare. Voss was silent. He looked at Mara, then at Nova. He left the room without a word. Mara found him an hour later in one of the estate's commercial walk-in freezers. The air was frigid, mist pluming from his mouth. Calder Ree was tied to a chair, shivering, his face a mask of terror. "Aurelio, please," Ree whimpered. "She offered me millions, a new life." "She offered you a cage," Voss said, his voice dead. He held a heavy steel wrench. "Do not kill him," Mara said from the doorway. Voss looked at her, his eyes hollow. "He put your daughter in the crosshairs. He tried to blow up 2 innocent men. And he is our only link to their infrastructure," Mara countered, walking into the freezing cold. "He is useless dead." She looked at Ree, her expression one of utter contempt. "Soames is playing you. You are a loose end. You think she will let you live to spend that money." Voss watched Ree's face crumble, saw the pathetic, terrified man beneath the greed. He tossed the wrench onto a steel shelf. It landed with a heavy, final clang. "You want a new life?" Voss asked, his voice low. He pulled a keycard from his pocket. "This opens the OMO basement level, the server room. Get it for me." Ree stared, uncomprehending. "What?" "The codes for the OMO server room," Voss repeated. "In exchange, this—" He threw a burner phone and a small passport onto Ree's lap. "A clean identity, a bank account with $50,000, enough to disappear. I will give you a 1-hour head start before I burn your name to Soames." Ree broke. He began to sob, a ragged, ugly sound in the freezing air. "Why?" he choked out. "Why are you—" "Because she is right. You are useless dead," Voss said, his voice cold. But as he looked at the pathetic man, something in him shifted. "And because it is the first time anyone has ever treated me like a person," Ree whispered. Finishing a thought Voss did not understand. Ree gasped out the codes, the sequence, the timing of the guard rotation. Voss took the information and walked out. Mara followed. "That was merciful," she said, as the freezer door hissed shut. "It was practical," Voss countered. "He gave us the keys." He paused, looking at the intel. "And he gave us this." Tucked into the passport Ree had handed over was a microdot. Nova processed it. It was not about the port. It was not about money. The file detailed a shadow organization within the FIB, a recruitment and asset utilization program. Code name, Black Beacon. Soames was not trying to kill Voss. She was trying to test Nova, the gala, the assassins, the poison. It was all an evaluation. She wanted to capture and induct Nova, to turn her into a national asset, just like the little girl Mara had saved. Mara's hands clenched into fists. She finally understood. This was not a fight for a harbor. This was not a mafia war. "This is a rescue mission," she said, her voice shaking with a cold, pure rage. "We are going to burn that black beacon to the ground." The OMO warehouse at Pier 12 was a silent, concrete monolith under a moonless sky. The attack was synchronized, a 3-pronged assault born of desperation and cold fury. Front 1. Aurelio Voss and a core team of 4 moved along the waterline. They did not breach the doors. They slid into the massive, grated culvert that emptied the pier's runoff into the bay. It was cold, dark, and tight. The air smelled of rust and salt. Their target, using Calder Ree's codes, was the sub-level server room, the physical host for the Black Beacon program. Front 2. Mara Lennox walked through the main OMO security checkpoint. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and the borrowed OMO security supervisor's uniform fit her perfectly. She flashed the high-level ID Ree had provided, her face a mask of bored authority. The guards, recognizing the clearance level, waved her through. She headed for the executive elevator, her heart a cold, steady drum. Her objective was Petra Soames's penthouse office. Her mission to access the hardline connection and upload the entire Harbor King file to the public-facing Canary grid, a kill switch for Soames's reputation. Front 3, in a nondescript plumbing van parked half a kilometer away, Nova sat surrounded by monitors. She was the mission's brain, her fingers dancing across 3 separate keyboards. She was not just watching, she was painting a new reality. Her primary drone, the Hirondelle, slipped through the warehouse's upper ventilation shafts, feeding her a live map. Simultaneously, she was injecting false data loops into the OMO's security net, making Voss's team invisible and creating ghost images of maintenance workers to distract the guards. Voss is in the vent shaft below the main hub. Nova's voice came over their secure earpieces. Mara, you are in the elevator. 3 minutes to target. Voss and his men dropped silently into the server corridor. It was sterile, cold and quiet. Too quiet. In the elevator, Mara watched the floor numbers climb. 20, 21. Suddenly, her earpiece hissed, then died, a wave of heavy static, followed by absolute silence. The lights in the elevator flickered, and a low hum vibrated through the steel. In the van, Nova's screens went black, one by one. Signal lost. She has triggered a cage protocol, Nova yelled, though only she could hear it, a building-wide Faraday cage. All wireless signals were dead. No comms, no drone control, no remote access. Her mother and Voss were blind, and so was she. Nova's eyes darted to the single monitor still working, a hardwired, long-range camera feed pointed at the exterior of the OMO building. She could not talk to her mother, but she could see her. She saw the lights in the penthouse office. On the 22nd floor, flash on, Mara had arrived. Nova's mind raced. She grabbed a new keyboard, one linked to the Granite Bay Port Authority's municipal grid. She could not hack the building, but she could control the lights outside it. On the massive loading crane 300 yards from Mara's window, a series of bright, white safety lights suddenly began to flash, piercing the darkness. SOAMESINROOM. In the penthouse, Mara saw the flashes. Morse code. She smiled. Silent cinema. Her daughter was still with her. She found Soames sitting at her desk, a pistol resting lightly on the polished wood. The cage protocol was a nice touch, Soames said, her voice calm. But you are too late. Mara, order requires dirty hands. Someone has to make the hard choices. This is not order, Mara said, striding to the wall terminal. It is just a cage built by someone afraid of the light. She slammed her hand on the terminal, initiating the upload. Cute. Soames sneered and hit a large red button under her desk, an emergency lockdown. Red lights flashed. Heavy steel shutters began to descend over the glass windows, sealing them in. Checkmate, Soames said. In the basement, the lockdown alarm blared. Steel gates slammed shut, trapping Voss and his team in the server corridor. A single, large man, the one from the gala with the garrote, stepped out from the server racks. He held 2 long, white ceramic blades. Voss shoved his men back. Get the door! He's mine! The fight was a blur. Voss was strong, but the attacker was faster, his ceramic blades slicing the air. Voss took a shallow cut to his ribs, then another. He was being boxed in. He remembered Nova, in the gym, watching him spar. Stop trying to win clean, Aurelio. Just win right. The attacker lunged. Voss did not block. He slipped his left hand out of his heavy tactical glove, coated it in the thick grease from a nearby server rack hinge, and threw the oily glove directly at the attacker's blade hand. The man, surprised, tried to deflect it. The glove hit the ceramic hilt. His grip, slick with oil, failed. The blade spun from his grasp. In that split second of confusion, Voss stepped in and ended the fight with a single, brutal blow. He turned to the server. Beacon route, he muttered, finding the main access drive, above in the penthouse. Mara was trapped. The upload was stuck at 40%, blocked by the internal lockdown, in the van. Nova watched the steel shutters close on her mother's location. She saw the external steam pressure readouts for the building and old, decommissioned pipe system. She rerouted all available power, triggering the emergency release valve. Inside the penthouse, a loud bang echoed from the walls. A massive cloud of high-pressure steam, hot and thick, blasted from an old radiator pipe, filling the room with white fog. The fire alarm shrieked. Soames coughed, her eyes watering. What is this? A fire, Mara said calmly. And what happens during a fire? Agent, the building's automated system. sensing extreme heat and smoke, overrode the lockdown. The steel shutters reversed, grinding open to vent the fire. The internal network, fooled by the conductive steam, recognized a catastrophic failure and dropped its firewalls to allow external emergency access. On Mara's terminal, the upload bar flashed green. 100% upload complete in the van. Nova smiled. "No!" Soames screamed, raising her pistol. The main doors to the penthouse burst open. Voss stood there, his shoulder bleeding, the beacon route drive in his hand. The three fronts had converged. "Let's go," Voss barked. Soames fired, but Mara was already moving, tackling Voss out of the doorway. The bullet sparked off the steel frame. They did not take the elevator. They took the emergency stairs down, linked up with Voss's men, and made their exit the same way he had come in through the water culvert as they slipped into the dark, churning water of the harbor. Voss clutched the drive. Nova, who had met them at the exit, was nursing her hand, the skin red and raw from overriding a superheated sensor panel to get the door open. Voss had a deep gash in his shoulder that was bleeding freely. They had the key, but they had paid for it. Behind them. Every alarm on Pier 12 began to ring, a discordant symphony echoing across Granite Bay. The Canary grid was live. The data was public. Petra Soames was finished. They did not go back to the estate. They drove inland, into the barren, wind-swept salt hills that overlooked Granite Bay. Their sanctuary was a long-abandoned church, its roof mostly intact, its stone walls a defense against the wind. They were cold, wet, and bleeding, but they were alive, and they had the route drive. Inside, by the light of 3 high-powered lanterns. Mara worked on Voss. He sat on the remnants of an old wooden choir stall, his shirt off, his face pale. The gash in his shoulder was deep, ragged, and still weeping blood. "Hold still," Mara ordered, her hands quick and practiced as she threaded a surgical needle. "This is getting to be a habit for you." He grunted, wincing as she cleaned the wound. "This time, I'm handing you the bandages, Mom." They both looked up. Nova stood there, holding a roll of gauze and a small bottle of antiseptic. She offered them to her mother with a faint, tired smile. "You're running low." Voss let out a short, rough laugh, which turned into a cough. Mara took the gauze, her own lips twitching. Smart kid. After he was bandaged, they sat close together on the cold stone floor, sharing a thermos of hot chocolate milk Nova had grabbed from the van and a loaf of bread one of Voss's men had stashed. The silence was heavy, but no longer tense. It was the shared exhaustion of survivors, the simple, warm food, the quiet drumming of the rain on the slate roof. It was a moment of profound, stolen peace. Voss looked at the dark, sweet liquid in his metal cup, his gaze distant. "My brother, Leo," he said, his voice thick. "He would have loved this." He looked at Mara, then at Nova, his eyes unnervingly bright. "He loved hot chocolate, always said it was the cure for a bad day. I wish he was alive to see this. To see that, a family, however broken and strange, was still possible." Mara's heart ached for him, for the shared history of loss that bound them. She looked at her own daughter, who was watching Voss with an expression of quiet empathy. "Nova," Mara said, turning to her, "what you did tonight, with the alarms, the steam, that was you. That was not Greyline. That was not me." "I know, Mom," Nova said, looking at her hands, still red from the hot panel. "I need you to understand," Mara continued, her voice fierce, willing her daughter to meet her eyes. "You are not a weapon. You are not an asset. Greyline, Soames, they are wrong. You are a person, and you have the right to choose. You can walk away from all of this. Right now. We will just disappear." Nova was silent for a long moment. She looked at her mother, at the desperate hope in her eyes. Then she looked at Voss, at the quiet, profound pain he held. She looked down at the Beacon Route Drive, the object that had cost them so much. "No," Nova said, her voice clear and steady. "I do not want to run anymore." She met her mother's gaze. "So let me choose. I choose to stand with you, and with Aurelio." The use of his first name, so simple and direct, landed with the weight of an oath. Voss looked at her, his expression unreadable. He reached into his own pocket and pulled out a simple leather thong. On it hung a small, irregularly shaped piece of dark metal, polished smooth but still showing the pits of its origin. He held it out to Nova. "This," he said, "is from the hull of the Odyssey, the first ship I ever salvaged, the first piece of steel I recycled for the new port." He placed the thong around her neck, the metal heavy and cold against her skin. "It is a promise. Nova, a clean harbor, a different tomorrow." Nova closed her hand around the pendant. A promise. A laptop, plugged into a satellite uplink, chimed from the corner. The screen lit up. It was a news alert from the Canary Grid's public feed. "She is gone," Voss said, standing up. The moment of peace shattered. The alert was clear. Special Agent Petra Soames, due for formal arrest on charges of domestic terrorism and corruption, has evaded her federal escort. Her whereabouts are unknown. "She is not running," Mara said, getting to her feet. "She is regrouping." Nova was already at the keyboard, her fingers flying. "Mom, she is activating her assets, the Black Beacon network. They are not routing to a government building. They are all converging on a single, private location." She brought up a map. "Spindle Yards, an old, decommissioned cable mill on the industrial peninsula. It is a dead zone. She's preparing for a final move," Voss said. "A lights-out night. She will burn the city to cover her escape." Mara looked at Voss. The truce, the healing. It was over. The final battle was here. "They will not stop. Aurelio, they will hunt us, and they will hunt her. The knot has to be tied at the end, not cut early." She took a deep breath. "This is not your fight alone. This is mine. I know how they think. I propose a final plan. We call it Lightning Rod." Voss looked at her, at the cold, brilliant fire in her eyes. This was not the security manager from the gala. This was the woman who had survived Greyline. He nodded. "Once." "You are in command. What is the plan?" "We are the Lightning Rod," Mara said. "We draw her to us, on our terms, and we end Black Beacon and Soames tonight." She looked at them both. "I will be the Overwatch, you two," she said to Voss and Nova. "You are my strike team." "One rule," Voss said, checking the load on his sidearm. "No killing," Mara finished. "If a clean takedown is an option, we are not them." Nova opened the static rules file on her laptop. She scrolled to the bottom, past the 12 rules they had written. She added a new one. "Rule 13, when you have a chance at a future, do not let the past drive." Mara put her hand on Nova's shoulder. Voss placed his on top of Mara's. The three of them stood there for a moment, a triangle of steel and resolve, a commitment. No one sacrifices themselves. No one is left behind. Nova looked at the clock in the corner of her screen. "She is moving fast. All Black Beacon assets are expected at Spindle Yards in 4 hours." The countdown had begun. Spindle Yards was dark as the bottom of the ocean. The abandoned cable mill was a skeleton of rust and shadow. The perfect place for a final, quiet war. The storm was directly overhead, lashing the tin roof with horizontal rain. Black Beacon had established a perimeter, using OMO agents as their outer guard. Inside the main factory floor, waiting in the absolute darkness, was a new, upgraded squad of the 12-fold Veil, version 3.0, from a ridge overlooking the mill. Mara Lennox activated the Lightning Rod. She had jury-rigged the mill's massive ancient loading crane, forcing its boom skyward, connecting its grounding cable to the internal junction box of the Black Beacon's Faraday cage. She waited. The sky turned white, and a bolt of lightning, seeking the highest point, struck the crane. A sound like a cannon shot echoed through the yard as 1 billion volts of electricity surged, bypassing the cage's protections and flash-frying its internal network. In the van, Nova watched the signal-jamming software flatline. "Cage is down. You have 90 seconds until their hard reboot." That was the signal. 90 seconds. From a breached utility tunnel, Voss and Nova moved. They ascended a twisted spiral staircase, emerging into the factory's upper gantry. They were silent. A 2-person strike team. Nova was fluid and fast, Voss a moving wall of cover. They encountered 4 Black Beacon operators, scrambling to reset the system. They did not use weapons. Nova used a high-potency pepper spray, blinding them. And Voss used zip ties, disabling them. Nova was the motion. He was the anchor. They dropped to the main floor just as the emergency lights flickered back on. Petra Soames stood in the center of the vast room, flanked by 6 of the 12 blades. "Impressive," Soames said, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. She was not panicked. She was pleased. "You passed, Nova. Every test." "This was a test?" Nova asked, her voice tight. "It always was," Soames admitted. Her face illuminated in the red emergency lighting. "The country needs saving, child, but the old ways, the clean ways, they do not work anymore. We need assets who can work in the dirty shadows. I am inducting you, Nova, into the national secret curriculum. You will be the one who saves this country." "No." The voice came from the gantry above. Mara stepped into the light, her face uncovered, her rifle aimed not at Soames, but at the ceiling. "I was a product of that kind of logic. Soames, I was taught that the mission was all that mattered. I lost who I was. I will not let my daughter lose herself again." "Then you will all die here." Soames snarled and signaled her blades. The final fight was a blur of motion. The 12 blades moved, their ceramic knives silent, but Voss and Mara were a wall, and Nova was the wind. Nova, using the steel measuring tape she had modified, snapped it like a whip, the metal end cracking against the wrist of one attacker. Forcing him to drop his blade, another lunged at her. Voss moved, shoving Nova clear, taking the shallow slash of the ceramic blade across his own bandaged shoulder. He grunted, the pain irrelevant. He kept his balance, grabbed the attacker's arm, and used the man's own momentum, pivoting, just as Mara had taught him. He executed a perfect hip toss, slamming the man onto the concrete floor. It was over. Soames, defeated. Her forces neutralized, backed away. Her face a mask of disbelief. She reached into her jacket. "Mara, no," Voss shouted. Soames was not pulling a gun. It was a detonator. "If I cannot have her," she screamed. "No one will." She pressed the button. Explosives, planted on the ceiling trusses, detonated. The roof began to collapse. Mara reacted on pure instinct. She shoved Voss and Nova backward, pushing them clear into a reinforced concrete alcove. "Get down!" They stumbled to safety. Mara was half a second too late. A massive steel I-beam, twisted by the explosion, crashed down, pinning her by the leg. She was trapped. Voss roared, trying to lift the beam, but it was too heavy. Debris was falling, fire spreading. "Mom!" Nova screamed. Mara looked at her daughter. "Run, that is an order, run!" Nova looked at her mother, at Voss, at the falling, fiery debris. She looked at the twisted beam, then she looked at the heavy, cracked welds holding the beam to its adjacent support, already fractured by the lightning overload. Nova spoke first. She grabbed the handheld sonic projector from her belt. She aimed it at the cracked welds, maxing out the frequency. A low, bone-jarring hum filled the air. She was not trying to break the beam. She was vibrating it. The metal screamed, the microfractures spreading, the beam shifted, groaning, the tension releasing as the cracked welds finally gave way. Voss, understanding, grabbed Mara under the arms. "Now." He pulled her free, rolling backward just as the entire section of the roof caved in, burying the spot where she had been. The wail of sirens cut through the roar of the fire, but this time, it was not the FIB. The main gates of Spindle Yards burst open, and the blue and white cars of the Granite Bay Civil Port Police flooded the compound, guided by the now public data from the Canary grid. They found Soames, wandering in the rain, shell-shocked. The remaining 12 blades simply sheathed their weapons and waited. One of them looked at Soames as the police cuffed him. "The contract is void. Black Beacon is exposed. You have no value." Soames looked up and saw Mara, bruised and covered in soot, emerge from the fire. You should have killed me," Soames whispered. Mara knelt, taking the heavy cuffs from a port officer. She clicked them onto Soames's wrists herself. "Light does not need permission to turn on, Agent," Mara said, her voice final. The choice, the moral argument, was over. Dawn broke over Granite Bay. The salt air smelled of rain and smoke. At a press conference, Aurelio Voss, his arm in a sling, announced he was transferring the deed for Pier 12 to the city, endowing it as a maritime search and rescue training center for at-risk teenagers. The OMO, exposed by the Canary Grid data, was formally dissolved by an emergency city council resolution later that day on a quiet wooden pier. Voss and Mara watched Nova coil a docking line. They had just bought a small, fast boat. "Tomorrow's tide," Nova announced, pointing to the name she had painted on the hull. Voss looked at Mara, the morning sun warming her face, erasing the shadows. "Family?" he asked, his voice quiet. Mara looked at her daughter, then back at him. She nodded. "On one condition," Nova said, tossing them the rope, her smile bright and real. "No more secrets from me." They made plans for their first real dinner as a family. As they walked off the dock, Nova took the steel pendant from around her neck. She tossed it high into the air. The piece of salvaged metal caught the new morning sun, and the light reflected a single, brilliant streak, like a clean path just waiting to be taken. In their new, safe apartment, a single white envelope, bearing no postmark, had been slipped under the door. Inside was a single card with a single line of type, "Is gone." But Omega has not been revealed. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Let us know in the comments where you are listening from, so we can all connect and share our thoughts. Please subscribe to my channel, Mafia Boss Story, like the video, and give it an extra boost by hitting the hype button, so this story can be heard by more people.